Good morning, Dr. Imani Price. How are you?
Oh, life is good. How are you?
I'm very good. We have a special guest today, Leon Van Bibber, Mr. V.
Hello,
He's
ladies.
going to be our veteran and personal health advisor. And today's topic is going to be battles beyond the battlefield, how to support our soldiers in their mental well being.
Yes, yes. I thought it was a very relevant topic as we have just commemorated September 11th on Monday.
Mhm.
And although definitely a somber day because of the tragedies, I saw promise and hope, and I saw unity in what we were doing in Washington, D.C. with the 911day.org organization. So I'm happy that we're here today talking about military well being. And Leon and I, both being veterans, we have seen it, we've been part of it, and yeah, so we're hoping that the discussion today will help to shine a light, and even for people who have not been involved with the military community, to just have a little peek at what some of your military friends might be experiencing or talking about. So, Mr. B, why don't you tell us a little bit about your military experience? And you have the rare, um, I guess, distinction of serving in three branches of the military. So, like, I can't even hate on you because you're Army just like I am, as well as everything else.
That would be true.
Oh, you are
Well, thank you,
funny.
Dr. Price. Yes, I've been in three branches of service, and a lot of people are like, well, how does that happen? And it just did. Right place, right time transitions, and uh, things just kind of ended, started and ended that way. Started in the Marine Corps, worked for the Navy for a while, and then worked for the Army for a little bit and retired out of the Army. Um, but the subject today is, about our veterans and what does this look like since 9/11 and this battle mind that we've created. And I can give a little bit of insight on that after multiple combat tours and multiple combat missions. And what does that look like? And what does that translate to when we come home? And not only are we affected, but also everyone around us, our spouses, kids, family members, they're also affected. So as therapists, what do we start to do? How do we really approach that subject in a way that's meaningful and doesn't make the service member feel awkward in that situation or even standoffish, because all of us put up that wall, including me. And prior to coming into our show, I even talked about what that wall looked like and how do we meet the soldier where they are and make that connection immediately to create that conversation. And we all know that conversations are really the key to success. It's about getting that conversation going. So for me, when I sit with a vet, it's where are they now? What's going on with them now? And two things that I always let them know as we come in and sit down and talk, and again, we talked about this prior to getting it going, is that you have a voice and you matter. And I let it sit for a second with them because they just kind of sit there and look at you, kind of like, do I trust this guy? Where's he going with this? And I let them know you have a voice and you matter.
Mhm. How did you balance, Leon, being a soldier and then being a person who has kids and being a spouse and a partner? How did you balance that as a military member?
It's hard because you also need to have a spouse that is also very strong. Um, and keeping them in the loop on everything, again, it goes back to communication,
Mhm.
talking to them, letting them know what's going on. Because a lot of times I've talked to several spouses that don't even know what their unit's motto is. They don't even know who the first sergeant is. And that can be impactful because now they're kind of alone in this fight, no matter what. And you've heard the term, hey, if you're in the army, whole family's in the army, right?
That's
So
the truth.
why not make them be a part of that?
Mhm.
So communication is key when it comes to that balance and being open. Um, so there's a lot of dynamics in that, and there's of course there's a lot of outliers that are in that relationship at the same time. But the one thing, Dr. Alston, is communication. You have to have that. Um, and when that spouse feels empowered, like they know something, they have a go-to, it's easier for them. It's when they don't know where to go, how to get help. It's challenging. And I still see that now, even with, being a therapist now and talking with families. There's still a disconnect. And it's just like, man, really, what's going on there? And so I still try to figure out what we can do to close that gap. And I'm not sure what that really is yet. Is it another class? I know military members are like, oh, here we go, another PowerPoint, another class. What are we, oh God, when are we ever going to get this right? So it's a balance. And I boil it right back down, Dr. Alston, to communicate with your spouse. It's not always going to be easy. It may not be what she wants to hear, or he wants to hear, but it's something they need to hear. They need to know where to go. They need to know how to adjust while you take off. What is the FRG? What does that look like for somebody in the Army? Who is that go-to leader in the FRG? A lot of times it's the captain's wife. A lot of times it's the first sergeant's wife. So again, it's about being in the know. It's about making things available,
Mhm.
and communication.
So I'm going to go at it from a different point of view. And I think the beauty of this panel today is that we have three different ways. You and I are the service members, Leon, but I was not married during my entire time in the Army. So you had a partner and a spouse who could take on some of those roles for you while you were doing the mission, the job that you needed to do for the military. I was doing it myself. I'm the mommy in the military. And when you're the mommy in the military, I think one of the most important things you can do is get support. I
Mhm.
had the support of people at my church. Of course, I had the support of my parents. And those things matter. Those things help make a difference because Jamal was so small. When he was born, I was active duty. I was by, grace, I'm also a psychologist. So a big part of my mission was at the hospital. But people have mental health crisis at every hour on a 24-hour clock.
Right.
So I have had to hospitalize people and been called for emergencies at every hour. So having family and friends who would be my backup when I'm getting called to the hospital, I can drop Jamal off at somebody's house and run to the hospital. Or if it's a Saturday or something, they'll take care of him while I run to the hospital and do what I needed to do. Um, Many of those times it's 2:30 in the morning. I'm not inclined to call anyone in that moment, depending on what's happening. The nurses knew him very well. uh, I would put his little jammies on, the warm things and the coat and all that stuff, hand him to a nurse. They would point me to the room. They would look after him, and I would run in there. So I think that when you're the service member, especially if you don't have a partner, you have to have everybody becomes your family.
Mhm.
And I think people are very open to that. They knew that I was not with a husband in at some point of my journey, and they all stepped in and stepped up. Having military people as family makes the difference. And you've been the military spouse. So Doc, what's your journey with this? How do you see this as being the partner of a military service member?
I think it's a unique perspective if you don't have family members. And I always feel sorry for the military spouses who are doing the moving 2 years, moving 2 years, moving 2 years, because you don't get a chance to create a solid network. You create these little seeds along the way, but what happens is that person is alone And I came in as a military spouse after I had a master's degree. And so for me, I had already developed kind of like a style of independence. And so coming in as a spouse, as a military service spouse, was okay for me because I was used to being alone. But I cannot imagine, coming out of high school or being a young spouse and having to deal with, when he or she leaves, you really are a single parent in a marriage. And so you become the chef, the caretaker, the nurse, you become the everything in the family. And if you don't have support, or if you don't know support, like Leon was saying, to connect your family to the military services, that is a hard thing to do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the service member has to do is we have to find those resources
Mm-hmm.
for our partners so that they know where to go if we're unavailable. Who else is there to help provide the support?
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are a lot of great supports on base and in the community for service members,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not always just looking you in the face. You've got to be proactive. I think the service member, there's a lot of stuff that's set up for us as the service member. And sometimes we have to dig a little bit to find it for our partners, but I think that we should.
It's helpful. And again, especially for the young ones and they have children and they're away from home and that support. And you can always, of course, call family members, but like you said, if you have to get up in the morning or that person has to go somewhere, there's no handing off to a nurse. You better hope daycare is open. Or you better hope you're near a family member or a friend that can help you. So the resources and the connection are different, I think, for spouses than it is for the service member.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hard part as a service member who didn't have family in town was when duty came up.
Mm-hmm.
So duty is 24 hours. So when your 24 hours rolls around and you've got that kid at home, you gotta make some before that happens, you have to have some connections already in place.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't bring your kid to work.
Right.
You're working. So yeah. So I think one of the things that I want to jump on next is the stigma of mental health in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of the things that I saw being the psychologist in the military is that oftentimes when the service member would deploy, their spouses would have military breaks. That was tough. That was tough.
Mm-hmm.
As the service member, Leon, what are some of the things that you guys dealt with the stigma side of getting mental health services and maybe seeing people who needed it, but they didn't get it because there's not always people who support service members going to get help for themselves?
That can also be a tricky dynamic. The biggest thing, and still to this day, even as I see clients, they get really worried about their security clearance.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the biggest things that I hear regularly is this security clearance. If I go see a counselor, therapist, and these notes get put in there and somebody reads them, or it just, there's always this taboo where like, oh well, my commander's going to end up seeing this, and without the realization that it's not that easy to get into someone's medical jacket and see what's going on. But it's always about that security clearance. I might lose that, then I'm not going to have a job. So that's one of the hurdles that I immediately see. But while I was on active duty, um, I was in when there was kind of a transitional phase going on at the same time. There were those that were like, "Hey, if you need help, go down to mental health. They're always open. Go." And I think that boils down to the culture of that command. Because every
Yes.
place you go, the culture's different.
Mm-hmm.
You got some commands that are all about it. You have other commands that They see it as a weakness. So there's no continuity. So you have a soldier that goes from one command that's firing on all 8 cylinders to another command that's firing on half, or it's jaded there, or it's in terms maybe hostile to them. So continuity is huge when we're going from place to place. And if we're not all going to be on the same sheet of music with how to approach this, it makes it hard for the service member because they're kind of stuck and they don't know what way to go. Do I go get mental health services? Do I not go get mental health services? And I know that as a military as a whole, you're gonna hear him say, well, you know what, we preach this, this, and this is really what we're after. And that's true. However, we can't take away that individual or that commander that is just, they're stern in how they want to do their business. And because the top can't see that
Right.
until oftentimes it's too late. Why do we have all these deaths going on over here? What's going on in that command? Then things start to surface. So it boils back down to how do we create continuity and how do we hold people accountable for making sure that soldiers alike, sailors, Marines, everybody knows that, hey, it's okay. Something's going on, let's get this looked at, that it's okay to go.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very large window. And I know you know that, Dr. Price, and I know you know that as well, Dr. Alston. You've seen it, and you're like, wow, it's one way over here, but it's this way over there. Why is that? Where's the disconnect?
That there
It's
isn't
often,
any continuity at the top,
Right.
yeah,
at the very top, and then trickling down. So I was at a base, and the general said I would possibly send people to you, but I wouldn't come.
Mm.
yeah,
So, in different conversations, so if the general's not coming, the colonels aren't coming.
Right.
If the colonels aren't coming, the lieutenant colonels aren't coming, and so on and so forth. Like, that's just not going to happen.
yeah. So
But
you
then
guys,
I've had other situations where, like Leon said, it was different, where the command was like, "You need to go on over there." But as the psychologist, what one of the things we tried to do at Fort Gordon is that we would try to be out and about. We would be walking around. The same at West Point. We would be walking and just trying to be less other scary. That's those mental health people. No, we're just soldiers. Like, we're just walking around, we're smoking and joking, we're talking to people. I'm eating over in Grant Hall. I'm doing whatever else. And so that I'm I'm not the scary person that you go and see at the hospital. You may see me at the PX, you might see me at the child, you may see me anywhere. You don't see me walking around. We tried our best to get out of the hospital, and not that we're having any private or confidential conversations while we're out and about, but it makes us it was to make us more human,
You normalize it.
approachable. Yes,
Yeah.
normalize it.
you're doing something that I like to refer to as ABA. That's Alpha Bravo Alpha. Always be approachable.
Mm-hmm.
And when people see you as that way, they gravitate towards you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're that mean asshole of a lieutenant or first sergeant, and all you want to do is worry about mission and not your people, because your people are your mission. Without your
Yes,
people, you have no mission.
absolutely.
Um, so always be approachable. And I had someone ask me, hey, what makes a good chief? Interesting. Because I asked that question a long time ago, and the answer I got was quite surprising. And I've always held on to that. And the answer was surround yourself with great people.
Mm,
Hmm. Took me a minute to think about that. Like, if you want to be a good chief, surround yourself with great people. They'll make you great because they're empowered. Empower your people. Let them know that you're there. And as you empower your people, you're going to shine anyways. A lot of times it's all about us letting go as well. If you're the
yes,
one in control and in charge, it's like, well, I'm going to get hit with this if this goes sideways. But if I don't give them a chance to do their job, I'm doing them a disservice. So know how to mentor, teach, coach, and be available. And when people know that you're available, they look at you differently. They talk to you differently because
Right.
you're approachable. Always be approachable. And we've seen that even within families. We've maybe got that one uncle or that one aunt where we're like, I'm not talking to that person. Why? Just,
Yeah,
nope. I know where that conversation's going.
right.
So then it boils right back down to communication. Can't stress it enough. Communicate. If you
Mhm.
can't be approachable, we can't communicate. So how do we learn how to be approachable? What's that stuck point in them? Why are they not approachable? Maybe they were taught wrong, because something made them unapproachable to keep them that way. So a lot of times I'll get with somebody that seems to be that same. Well, tell me more about that. Why do you think we need to do it this way? Because you're losing your audience and you're losing it quickly. So what do we do differently? This isn't about you. This is about them.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to find that way in and get them to be vulnerable in conversation, to open up, to have a conversation.
Hmm.
So it can be tough.
I think the
Yeah.
key word is vulnerable, though. That's really hard for military service members because that's not built into the dynamics of being a soldier. You're not
No,
supposed to be vulnerable, and that's a
not at
very
all.
hard dynamic to you can't turn that on and off. So if you train someone to be resilient and tough and strong and not vulnerable, there's that when they go home, that comes home with them, and they bring that home to a family. And there's I've had several family member clients who don't get it. They don't understand that it's difficult for that service member to connect because they're taught not to be vulnerable. That's not a part of the SOP. That's not a part of the dynamic. And so when they come home and they're tough and they're rigid, and they have these expectations and they dig in and they don't do soft family feelings. That's because it becomes a part of that field training or that sea bag or that airman, or
Hmm.
as Leon says, the puddle, puddle, what do you call it? Puddle jumpers?
Oh, we're talking about the Coast Guard now, the puddle pirates?
That that mindset is not a turn on, turn off. And so they turn on as soldiers, and it's really hard to connect sometimes as a family member.
But the rigidity is not the resilience.
Right,
The resilience is the bounce back.
right.
Yes.
So the people who are inflexible and rigid, a lot of times behind that is a lot of pain and a lot of fear
Hmm.
that I'm not. How many people come into our offices and say, I can't allow myself to cry because I won't stop. I can't
Right.
allow myself to feel because then I don't know where the boundaries would be.
Hmm.
So I keep it here because then I know what this looks like. I have one that I'm working with, I've been working with for years. And
Hmm.
he said, if I let go of the anger, the nightmares, the all the stuff, then I lose my memory of so and so. I lose my edge over being tough, and I don't know what I would look like. It's hard.
It's identity.
Right, right.
And a lot of times that identity creates that noise that I talked about that's up here. And a lot of times it's hard to deal with that noise. And that's how I describe it as I'm sitting in session with somebody. I'm like, they're just like, I can't turn this off. And I'm like, so your noise is up here. And you're like, yes. I'm like, and for most people, it's manageable and it's down here, right here in this middle spot. And as you come into therapy, one, I can never make those memories go away. There is no magic pill. I'm not the man in black. I can't hit the capsule and make it go away. But what we can do is we can take this noise and we can turn it down. That's our job. My job isn't to make the memory go away. I don't want it to go away. It's part of who you are. Now, if there's a trigger that's involved in that, then yeah, then we'll work around that trigger. We'll figure out what that trigger is, and maybe we just avoid the trigger or we replace it with something else. But at the end of the day, I want to get you from this noise to here. And they
Right.
start to think about that. They see that visual and they're like, oh yeah, I am up here. And maybe, some of the modalities I have aren't going to get that noise all the way down. And we'll go into something else to get that down. A lot of times we have to do a couple of different things to get it
Yeah.
to get to here. But something I then talk about is PTG, which is post-traumatic growth,
Mm-hmm.
growing out of that trauma. And it's like, oh, they hear that and they're like, oh, but what's that? What is that post-traumatic growth thing? So now I got them get them interested again, and they're like, oh, well, what's that feel like? Um, and post-traumatic growth typically has 5 areas, and that's something General Dees talks about. The sense of a new opportunity, right? That's part
Mhm.
of that. And I got these written down because I did not memorize them.
That's okay.
Um, it's, another one is an increased sense of one's own strength, a greater appreciation for life, through spirituality, religious domain, something like that, um, and a deepening of their own spiritual lives.
Mm-hmm.
So you start to talk about those 5 points, and even a change in relationship with others. So they start to feel what you're saying. Uh, oh, well, how's that work? So you create an opportunity through curiosity, and that's how that post-traumatic growth really. You start to talk about that. We talk about that resilience. We start to talk about that bounce because you put it in those perspectives of, hey, do you want to be this tennis ball or do you want to be this egg, right? It was great when General D said that, and I was like, oh, this is interesting. I know where he's going with this, but
Yes.
it's like, do you want to fall and go splat? Because that's it. And the egg hits the ground like Humpty Dumpty, it's over. Or do you want to be that ball that bounces and comes back up? Well, how do we do that? They just sit there for a second. Even I sat there for a second. I'm like, well, what does that mean? How do I bounce? How do I stay resilient? Um, again, goes back to communication. It goes back to being vulnerable. And how do we get that person to become vulnerable? We be vulnerable with them. Because if you're vulnerable with them, they're going to be vulnerable with you. If they feel like they're not the only one in the room being vulnerable, changes. And then all of a sudden, that conversation changes. The way that we talk with them, the tone, all of it matters.
Right.
Um, the whole disposition of the conversation, when they realize that it's no longer, they're not the odd man, they're not the elephant in the room anymore. It's interesting. Then they
Yeah,
start to talk, and it starts to happen.
that's a good place for them.
Hmm.
Our last thing I want to bring up is the community
Mm,
and how developing the community to me is part of building the post traumatic growth. Being able to have either brothers and sisters in arms, the support of spouses coming together, your church, wherever you feel and wherever you believe you belong, where you're accepted, where your voice can be heard, where people want to see you thrive.
Right.
The one of the things that as service members, I know that we tend to do is that we isolate. And through our practice, we are trying to build community. We're building, I'm not saying we're trying, we're building communities. My female veterans group,
Hmm.
the Women's Wellness Brigade, those ladies are ride and die for each other. And I love seeing that. And although each week I have a topic, someone comes and they've had a tough day, they're the topic. That's the topic. We're open and we have to be. And Leon runs groups also. What have you noticed in building community, Leon?
the one thing I've noticed is that when everybody gets in there, they realize they're not alone anymore. And that's the whole purpose of any group, as far as I'm concerned. You're not alone anymore. You're not the odd man out. And the community starts because then all of a sudden one person talks. Well, what do you do? Well, I'm doing this. Oh, well, where's that at? And it starts building. And before you know it, everybody's in tune. Everybody's empowered. Everybody feels like they have a voice because they're all sharing the same thing. So information starts to spread. And I've got one particular major in group. She's retired and she is all about connecting and giving back. That's all she does.
Love that.
Whether it's through Catch a Lift or going to Wounded Warrior Project, and also another great place is Upstate Warrior Solutions. Um, even canine training. I mean, she is got something for everything just about. So she's able to share that information across, and
Mhm.
people are just, oh, let me get this, let me get this. So when you ask me about group, I say it's essential because group is really what got me to even go to individual. When you start in group, you're not the, you know, you're not alone. A lot of
Yes.
people don't like to do that individual thing right immediately because is it just me? No, promise you, it's not just you. Um, and going to the VA, a lot of times there's just not room for that individual one-on-one immediately. They start you in group, which in retrospect was a great thing because it allowed you to see that you weren't alone, that there were
Right.
other people out there. And all of a
Absolutely.
sudden there's other resources and there's other things. And then you're like, oh. And it's actually much easier to broach that subject of individual therapy because then you go into individual therapy with knowing that you were never alone to begin with and that this is something that we can manage. I don't always like to use the word fix because you can't always fix everything, but we can manage almost everything.
We can. Absolutely. We
Right.
absolutely can. Doc, as the spouse, what say you?
I I think again that dynamic of balance is needed, and as Leon alluded to earlier, communication is key, and that vulnerability for not just for the military member but for the spouse as well. It's
Absolutely.
protecting and serving the country is such a vital assignment, and it's just a different way of living from the civilian world that you have to have communication and you have to be vulnerable with your family members, whether it's from the service member side or whether it's from the spouse side, and not hold that frustration of how the military plays in your family or your marriage against each other, but to use it, how can you communicate? How can we make this stronger? How can we be our own little corporation or company so that we can be effective for each other and for our respective, you know, roles as a member and as a spouse? Communication and that vulnerability is key.
So before we wrap up, I'm going to ask each one of you guys to give just one tip or one thing you would say to a military family about supporting the mental health and well-being of that family of their corporation.
Go to therapy. There's nothing wrong with getting an unbiased opinion or just unloading on someone. Don't use your partner as an accountability person. Go to therapy. It's not gonna hurt anything. We're not gonna put you away unless you're gonna hurt somebody or yourself. But other than that, go talk to somebody.
Mr. B,
I'll say what I always say. You have a voice and you matter. Talking to somebody is going to change things. Once you understand you have a voice and that you matter, you start to realize that almost anything's possible. But you have to understand you have a voice and that you matter and that there is help out there, that there is somebody that's going to listen. So that's the one thing I'll tell you. You have a voice and you matter.
Right.
love that. And for me, it is there is a community of people who are waiting and willing to be in this with you.
Right.
Whatever it is you're going through, you don't have to go through it alone. And like the two of you just said, you have a voice and you matter. Get therapy, get help. Until you're ready for individual, there are communities, there's groups, and you can find them at the VA. You can find them at the through other agencies that are out there, but you absolutely can find them through our organization, Women's Center Fitness or Veterans Center for Wellness. So we invite anyone to reach out to us. So thank you for being here with us today. Remember, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We will be back next week with another compelling mental health topic. And if you have any thoughts or comments, please put them below. And until next time, take care of yourself, and we will see you again soon. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.